Ladies and gentlemen, anger, that powerful and primal emotion, is something we all encounter, but it's not simply an impulse that takes over us from time to time. It's a deep psychological force that, when misunderstood and uncontrolled, can wreak havoc on your life and the lives of those around you. The question then becomes, how do we prevent anger from seizing us, from steering us down a path we know we'll regret? And the answer, it turns out, lies not in suppressing the emotion, but in understanding it, in mastering it. The first thing to recognize is that anger is a secondary emotion. It is not the root. Anger often arises from a deeper source: fear, hurt, frustration, or even a sense of helplessness. You might be angry because you feel betrayed, misunderstood, or disrespected. The intensity of the anger, however, is not proportional to the situation. It's a signal that something inside you is broken or unhealed. And that's where the work begins, examining what's beneath the surface. Now, it's easy to feel justified in being angry. After all, the world is full of injustices. People lie, betray, and disappoint. Life throws curveballs that seem unfair. But if we simply react with rage, we are playing into the hands of the very forces that we believe are holding us back. Anger leads to more destruction, more alienation, and more pain. It doesn't provide clarity, it doesn't solve problems, it amplifies the chaos. So how do we maintain control? The answer is in mindfulness and self-awareness. First, you need to be aware of when anger begins to rise. It's a physiological process. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your breath becomes shallow. These are early warning signs, and in those moments, you have a choice. You can either let the emotion take over, or you can decide to pause. That pause is crucial. In that brief moment, you create space between stimulus and response. What do you do in that space? You take a step back. You breathe deeply. You focus on the physical sensations in your body. You observe the anger without judgment. Why? Because the more you observe, the less likely you are to act on it impulsively. You begin to see the emotion for what it is, a temporary state, not a defining characteristic of who you are. By acknowledging the anger without identifying with it, you begin to break its power over you. At the same time, you need to cultivate your emotional resilience. Anger is often the result of accumulated stress and unresolved conflict. If you constantly suppress your emotions, bottle them up, or allow your life to be defined by chaos and disarray, you will inevitably face outbursts of rage. But if you take care of your emotional health daily through reflection, exercise, proper sleep, and healthy relationships, you build a foundation that makes it harder for anger to take control. This doesn't mean that you will never get angry. It doesn't mean that you won't feel the heat of frustration and injustice, but it means you will have the tools to handle it when it arises. It means you can respond thoughtfully, with clarity, and with a sense of purpose rather than simply reacting. It means that you can transform anger from a destructive force into a powerful catalyst for positive change. Understand that your mind and body are capable of far more than you think. Your emotions do not control you, you control them. And when you can master this, when you can rise above the chaos and cultivate calm, you become not only a better person, but a force of stability and strength in a world that desperately needs it. Anger, as an emotion, is complex. It's not a simple reaction to external circumstances, but rather an emotional signal that often reveals something deeper within us. To truly understand how to manage and prevent anger from taking control, it's essential to grasp the idea that anger is a secondary emotion. This means that rather than being the root cause of our distress, anger is often a response to something else, a deeper, more hidden feeling that lies underneath the surface. It's a mask, an outward expression of more profound emotional turmoil that we might not yet have fully processed or understood. When we encounter a situation that triggers anger, it's easy to focus solely on the immediate external cause. Someone cuts us off in traffic, a colleague disrespects us, or a loved one says something hurtful. In these moments, anger feels automatic, almost justified. We might think the anger is a direct response to what's happening right in front of us. However, anger is rarely as straightforward as it seems. More often, it's a reflection of underlying emotions that have been building up over time, emotions we may not even be fully aware of. Take frustration, for example. Many people find themselves angry when things don't go according to plan, when goals are thwarted, expectations are dashed, or their efforts seem wasted. But the anger felt in these moments often has more to do with a sense of powerlessness or a fear of failure. At a deeper level, frustration is a sign that we are not in control of the situation, and that feeling of helplessness is what triggers the anger. If we ignore that core feeling and react purely from the anger, we miss an opportunity to address the true cause of our distress. Similarly, anger often arises when we feel hurt or betrayed, when someone says something that wounds us, whether it's a personal insult, a broken promise, or an act of injustice. We might immediately respond with rage. However, the root of that anger is not the insult itself, but the pain of feeling invalidated, unappreciated, or abandoned. Anger is an emotional defense mechanism, a way to protect ourselves from the vulnerability that comes with being hurt. But, much like other defensive reactions, anger can be counterproductive, as it prevents us from addressing the pain directly. The same principle applies to feelings of fear. In many cases, we might be angry because we are afraid of something. Perhaps we are afraid of being judged, of losing control, or of facing an uncomfortable truth. Fear is often the silent motivator behind anger, and yet it's far less recognized. Anger in this context becomes a form of emotional armor, a way to cover up that fear and maintain a sense of strength and control, even though it's only a temporary solution. This is why understanding anger as a secondary emotion is so important. By recognizing that anger is a response to deeper feelings, we can start to ask ourselves the right questions. What am I truly feeling right now? Am I afraid of being vulnerable? Am I hurt by something someone has said or done? Or is this anger masking a sense of powerlessness that I don't know how to cope with? When we begin to identify and confront these underlying emotions, we open the door to healthier ways of dealing with our anger. Instead of reacting impulsively, we can respond thoughtfully. For example, if we can recognize that our anger is rooted in fear, we might take a step back and ask ourselves what we're truly afraid of. By understanding the fear, we can address it directly, often diffusing the anger before it takes control. If the anger is rooted in hurt, we can choose to communicate our feelings openly rather than letting resentment build up and turn into more destructive emotions. The process of uncovering these deeper feelings can take time, but it's essential for emotional growth. By learning to see anger as a symptom of something deeper, we stop viewing it as a simple emotional reaction and start recognizing it as a signal, one that requires our attention. The more we understand about the emotions driving our anger, the better we can manage them, ultimately preventing anger from having the kind of unchecked power that can derail our lives. Anger, when left unchecked, can be incredibly destructive. It is often seen as a powerful and justified emotion, a response to perceived injustices or wrongs, and it can feel like a natural and righteous force when we are confronted with challenges or setbacks. However, the truth is that anger, in its raw and uncontrolled form, doesn't lead to positive outcomes. Rather, it amplifies the chaos and disarray in our lives, making situations worse and perpetuating negative emotions. The idea that anger somehow provides clarity or a solution to a problem is a fallacy. In reality, anger clouds our judgment, causes harm to relationships, and prevents us from seeing the truth of a situation. When we give in to anger, we allow it to dictate our responses. It becomes the lens through which we view the world, and in that moment, it takes over our decision-making process. The emotional surge that comes with anger often results in impulsive, reactive behaviors, words said in haste, actions taken without thought, decisions made in the heat of the moment. These knee-jerk reactions rarely align with our best interests or long-term goals. Instead of solving the problem at hand, anger only adds fuel to the fire, leading to more tension, more conflict, and more regret. Think about the times when anger has led you to say or do something you later wished you hadn't. Perhaps it was a harsh word spoken to a loved one, a snap judgment made about a colleague, or a decision made in the heat of the moment that caused unintended consequences. In these situations, anger can blind us to the full scope of what's happening. It narrows our focus and magnifies perceived slights or injustices, making us feel as though the situation is far worse than it may actually be. We become trapped in a cycle of escalating emotion where our anger fuels further anger and the situation spirals out of control. This escalation is particularly evident in relationships. When we allow anger to dictate our interactions with others, we distance ourselves from understanding and empathy. Instead of attempting to resolve conflicts with clarity and patience, we respond defensively, creating an environment where communication breaks down. The other person may become defensive as well, and what was initially a minor disagreement can quickly turn into a major fallout. Instead of reaching a solution, both parties become entrenched in their positions, and the rift deepens. Anger in this sense doesn't protect us, it isolates us. The impact of uncontrolled anger extends beyond personal relationships. It affects our professional lives too. In a workplace, acting out of anger can damage reputations, hinder teamwork, and stifle progress. Decisions made in anger may not be well thought out, and the repercussions can be long-lasting. You may make rash business decisions, speak to colleagues or subordinates inappropriately, or alienate potential collaborators. Anger in a work environment creates tension and distrust, which can ultimately hinder productivity and success. When we let anger govern our actions, we allow it to override rational thinking and strategic planning, undermining our ability to navigate complex situations effectively. Moreover, when anger becomes a habitual response, it starts to shape our identity. We begin to see ourselves as angry people, defined by this emotion. Anger can become a default mode of operation, one that we turn to without consciously choosing it. This identity can be self-reinforcing as we start to interpret even neutral or ambiguous situations as provocations, believing that we are constantly under attack or that the world is perpetually unfair. This mindset not only perpetuates anger but also erodes our capacity for empathy, understanding, and patience. We begin to view the world through a lens of conflict and opposition, where every encounter becomes an opportunity for frustration and resentment. In this way, anger isn't just an emotional response, it's a pattern of thinking and behavior that compounds the negative emotions we feel. The more we act out of anger, the more ingrained it becomes in our mindset and in our interactions with others. And the more entrenched anger becomes, the harder it is to break free from it. Instead of resolving conflicts and overcoming obstacles, we remain trapped in cycles of negativity that prevent us from seeing the bigger picture, appreciating alternative perspectives, or finding constructive solutions. Anger in its uncontrolled form is not a force that provides clarity or resolution. It's a force that exacerbates problems and deepens conflicts. Instead of helping us navigate challenges, it blinds us to the truth and causes us to act in ways that only add to the turmoil. The key then is to recognize that while anger is a natural emotion, it must be managed with awareness and control. When we allow anger to govern our responses, we lose our ability to think clearly, to act rationally, and to preserve the integrity of our relationships. The destructive nature of unchecked anger is evident in every aspect of life, from personal to professional interactions, and if we are to live with intention, we must learn to temper it, redirect it, and ultimately transform it into something that serves us rather than undermines us. The ability to be mindful and self-aware is one of the most critical tools we can develop in preventing anger from taking control. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that anger exists within us. We must become attuned to its early signs and intervene before it spirals out of control. This requires an active effort to cultivate a practice of mindfulness, where we observe our emotional states without judgment, allowing us to gain a deeper understanding of what is triggering our reactions. The more we train ourselves to be mindful of our emotional responses, the more control we gain over how we react to challenging situations. Mindfulness begins with awareness. The first step in controlling anger is recognizing when it arises. Anger is often not an immediate, explosive reaction, but a slow build-up of emotional tension. At the early stages, you may not even recognize that you're beginning to feel angry. This is where mindfulness plays a pivotal role. It allows you to pause and take note of the physical sensations in your body, the thoughts in your mind, and the emotions you are experiencing. If you can catch the subtle signs of anger before it intensifies, such as the tightening of your jaw, shallow breathing, or a racing heartbeat, You create an opportunity to stop and assess what's really happening. This is crucial because once anger has fully manifested, it becomes much harder to control. When you act impulsively in the heat of the moment, you are likely to say or do things you regret. In contrast, if you can identify anger early on and create space between the stimulus and your response, you give yourself time to choose how you want to react, rather than simply letting the emotion dictate your actions. That pause, however brief, is incredibly powerful. In that moment, you have the opportunity to step outside of your immediate emotional reaction and consciously decide whether or not you want to engage with the anger or let it go. But mindfulness is not just about noticing when anger arises, it's about observing it without judgment. Often we are conditioned to see anger as a negative or undesirable emotion, and we try to suppress it when it emerges. However, trying to push anger away only fuels it. The more we resist, the stronger the impulse becomes. Instead, mindfulness teaches us to observe our anger with curiosity, acknowledging its presence without condemning ourselves for feeling it. By accepting anger as a natural part of being human, we can diffuse its power over us. Furthermore, mindfulness allows us to explore the underlying causes of our anger. When we pause to reflect on what we're feeling, we open the door to understanding the root of the emotion. Often, anger is a reaction to something deeper: fear, frustration, disappointment, or a sense of being misunderstood. These emotions, while often uncomfortable, are essential for understanding our needs and boundaries. Mindfulness helps us uncover these layers, providing clarity about what is truly bothering us. For instance, when we feel angry, it may be because we feel disrespected, unheard, or powerless. If we can identify these emotions, we can address the true cause of our anger rather than reacting to it superficially. Mindfulness also involves becoming aware of our thought patterns. When anger strikes, our thoughts often spiral into a negative loop, reinforcing our sense of injustice or hurt. We may begin to ruminate on what was said or done, reliving the perceived slight over and over in our minds. This cycle of negative thinking only intensifies the anger, making it more difficult to let go. However, through mindfulness, we can interrupt this cycle. By noticing when we start to dwell on the issue and consciously shifting our focus, we stop feeding the anger with additional thoughts. We can choose to focus on our breath, on the sensations in our body, or on the present moment, allowing the intensity of the anger to subside. Moreover, mindfulness fosters emotional resilience. By practicing mindfulness regularly, we become more adept at handling difficult emotions in general, not just anger. As we develop a greater understanding of how our emotions arise and pass, we become less likely to be overwhelmed by them. Instead of being swept away by the tide of our emotions, we learn to float above them, observing them with detachment and allowing them to pass naturally. This emotional resilience, built through consistent mindfulness practice, strengthens our ability to navigate challenging situations with composure. The beauty of mindfulness lies in its ability to transform how we experience and respond to emotions. When we approach anger with mindfulness, we break free from the automatic reactive patterns that often lead to regret and harm. Instead of being driven by anger, we become observers of it, able to choose a response that is more thoughtful, measured, and constructive. Over time, this shift in perspective can significantly reduce the frequency and intensity of angry outbursts, allowing us to live with greater emotional balance and peace. Mindfulness doesn't eliminate anger, but it offers a way to manage it, transforming it from a destructive force into an opportunity for self-awareness and growth. Emotional resilience is the foundation upon which we can build a stable, balanced life, one where we are not easily swept away by the tides of anger or frustration. The ability to manage anger is directly linked to how well we can handle the stresses and emotional challenges that life inevitably presents. Emotional resilience is not about suppressing or ignoring negative emotions, but about learning to navigate them in healthy and constructive ways. It is the capacity to face life's difficulties with strength, adaptability, and an ability to recover quickly from setbacks. When we are emotionally resilient, we are less likely to be overwhelmed by emotions like anger, because we have developed the tools and mindset to cope with stressors in a way that prevents emotional escalation. Building emotional resilience starts with taking care of ourselves on a physical, emotional, and psychological level. Self-care is not a luxury, it is a necessity. This means establishing a routine that prioritizes your well-being, whether through regular physical activity, proper rest, or engaging in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. Our bodies and minds are deeply interconnected, and neglecting our physical health can directly affect our emotional state. For instance, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, or chronic stress can make us more vulnerable to emotional instability. When we are physically depleted, our emotional resources are also drained, and we are far more likely to react impulsively with anger when faced with challenging situations. Another crucial aspect of building emotional resilience is learning to process emotions in a healthy way. Many people, when faced with difficult emotions like anger, attempt to push them aside or suppress them. This suppression often leads to emotional buildup, and eventually that pent-up anger will inevitably find a way to surface, often in an uncontrolled and destructive manner. Instead of avoiding or burying difficult emotions, resilient individuals embrace them, but recognize that emotions are signals, providing valuable information about what is happening in their lives and within themselves. Anger, for example, may signal that something feels unfair or that a boundary has been crossed. When we acknowledge the emotion without judgment, we create an opportunity to explore its root cause and address it in a thoughtful, deliberate manner. Part of this emotional processing involves developing the ability to self-regulate. Emotional regulation refers to the ability to manage and modify emotional responses in a way that aligns with our values and goals. This doesn't mean repressing emotions, but rather understanding them and choosing how to respond. For example, when anger arises, emotional regulation allows us to pause and assess the situation before reacting. Instead of immediately responding with a burst of anger, we can take a few deep breaths, step back, and choose a more measured response. Over time, self-regulation becomes a habit that allows us to keep our emotions in check, reducing the likelihood of impulsive outbursts. Another essential element of emotional resilience is cultivating a positive mindset. Our thoughts have a profound impact on how we experience and respond to emotions. When we approach life with a mindset of growth and positivity, we are better equipped to handle challenges without being overwhelmed by negative emotions like anger. For instance, instead of viewing an argument or disagreement as a personal attack, we can reframe it as an opportunity to understand someone else's perspective and strengthen our communication skills. This shift in mindset allows us to face difficult situations with a sense of curiosity and openness rather than defensiveness. A positive mindset helps us see challenges as opportunities for growth, which in turn makes us more resilient in the face of adversity. Building emotional resilience also involves creating a strong support system. We are social creatures, and having a network of trusted friends, family members, or colleagues provides emotional stability during times of stress. Resilient individuals recognize the importance of connection and seek support when they need it. Having someone to talk to, vent to, or receive guidance from can be incredibly grounding when we are facing emotional turbulence. The act of sharing our emotions with others not only helps to release pent-up feelings, but also provides a sense of validation and perspective. Supportive relationships provide a safe space where we can process difficult emotions and gain insights into how to handle them more effectively. Finally, emotional resilience is built through practice. It is not something that happens overnight, but rather something that develops over time through consistent effort and self-reflection. Just as physical strength is built through regular exercise, emotional strength is cultivated through experiences that challenge us emotionally. Every time we face a stressful situation, a difficult conversation, or a conflict, we have the opportunity to strengthen our emotional resilience. Each time we manage to stay calm, reflect on our emotions, and respond thoughtfully, we reinforce the emotional skills that help us maintain control over our reactions. When we build emotional resilience, we are better equipped to handle the inevitable ups and downs of life without being overwhelmed by anger or other destructive emotions. We develop the capacity to face adversity with grace, to manage our emotions thoughtfully, and to bounce back from setbacks. This emotional strength not only helps us manage anger, but also enhances our overall well-being, allowing us to live more balanced and fulfilling lives. Emotional resilience is not about avoiding negative emotions. It's about developing the tools and mindset to handle them in a way that doesn't cause harm to ourselves or others. The process of mastering our emotions is not an easy task. It requires consistent effort, self-awareness, and the development of emotional intelligence over time, but the reward for doing this work is immense. The ability to maintain a sense of control over how we react rather than allowing our emotions to dictate our actions. When it comes to anger, this process is especially critical. Anger, when left unchecked, can lead to poor decisions, fractured relationships, and even physical harm. However, by mastering our emotions, particularly anger, we gain the ability to respond in a way that is measured, thoughtful, and aligned with our values, rather than being driven by impulse. Mastering anger does not mean suppressing or ignoring it. Rather, it means learning to observe the emotion without identifying with it. Anger is an emotion that often feels all-consuming. When we're angry, it can feel as though the anger becomes part of our identity. We might tell ourselves, "I'm an angry person," or "this situation deserves my anger." However, the first step toward mastery is understanding that anger is not who we are. It is simply an emotional response to external events or internal thoughts. By recognizing this distinction, we can begin to disassociate ourselves from the anger itself. Instead of becoming the emotion, we can view it as an experience that we are currently having, which is temporary and changeable. This shift in perspective is incredibly powerful because it creates distance between us and the emotion, giving us space to respond in a more measured way. In order to master anger, we must first develop the ability to observe it when it arises. Many people react to anger automatically, without even realizing that they are feeling it. The body sends out physical signals: tightness in the chest, clenched fists, shallow breathing. But often, we are too caught up in the moment to notice. By learning to tune into these physical signals and recognizing when anger is beginning to build, we can intervene before it reaches a boiling point. This requires cultivating a heightened level of awareness, a practice that can be developed through mindfulness techniques such as deep breathing or body scans. These practices help us become more attuned to our emotional and physical states, so we can detect anger early and choose how to handle it. Once we recognize the anger, the next step is to pause and give ourselves space to choose how we will respond. In moments of anger, our impulse may be to react quickly, whether through speaking sharply, raising our voice, or acting impulsively. However, research has shown that when we take a moment to pause and reflect, we are more likely to make decisions that are in line with our long-term goals and values. This pause allows us to step outside of the immediate emotional reaction and to make a more rational decision about how to handle the situation. In some cases, this might mean choosing not to engage with the anger at all, deciding to walk away or take a break before responding. In other cases, it might involve finding a way to express the anger in a constructive manner, perhaps through calm communication, assertiveness, or finding a solution to the underlying issue. Furthermore, mastering anger involves changing our relationship with the emotion itself. Rather than viewing anger as an enemy to be fought or suppressed, we can learn to view it as a signal. Anger often arises because we feel threatened, disrespected, or powerless. These feelings of threat or injustice are important because they reveal something about our boundaries or values. Instead of simply reacting to the anger, we can use it as an opportunity to examine what is truly bothering us. What is the underlying cause of the anger? Is it a violation of our boundaries, a fear of failure, or a sense of unfairness? By understanding the root cause of our anger, we can address the real issue, whether it involves setting boundaries, confronting a problem, or changing our expectations. Additionally, mastering our emotions requires emotional regulation, an ability to stay calm even when we are emotionally triggered. Emotional regulation is not about suppressing or denying feelings, but rather about managing how we express those feelings. It involves finding ways to channel our emotions into positive, productive actions. One of the most effective ways to regulate anger is through self-talk, reframing our thoughts to prevent them from spiraling into negative, self-destructive patterns. For example, if we are angry because someone has disrespected us, we might remind ourselves that we cannot control others' behavior, but we can control how we respond. By reframing the situation in this way, we reduce the power of anger and regain control over how we react. Mastering anger also means understanding the importance of forgiveness and letting go of grudges. Holding on to anger often means holding on to past hurts, and when we do this, we keep ourselves emotionally tethered to those negative experiences. This prevents us from moving forward and robs us of the peace that comes with emotional freedom. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing bad behavior or forgetting what happened, but it does mean releasing the hold that anger has on us. When we forgive, we choose to prioritize our emotional well-being over our attachment to past wrongs, allowing us to move forward without the burden of unresolved anger. Ultimately, mastering our emotions, including anger, is about developing emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our emotions in a way that leads to healthier outcomes. By observing anger without identifying with it, taking a pause to make thoughtful decisions, and addressing the underlying causes of the emotion, we can transform anger from a force of destruction into a tool for self-awareness and growth. Through consistent practice and self-reflection, we not only gain control over our anger, but also become better equipped to navigate life's challenges with resilience, wisdom, and emotional balance. In the end, anger, like all emotions, is a natural part of being human. It's not something we should seek to eliminate, but rather something we must learn to manage. By recognizing anger as a secondary emotion, observing it without becoming it, and practicing mindfulness, emotional resilience, and self-regulation, we transform anger from a force that controls us into one that we can control. Mastery over our emotions doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that requires effort, patience, and commitment. But the reward is a life lived with greater awareness, deeper understanding, and healthier relationships. When we approach anger with insight and compassion toward ourselves and others, we open the door to more thoughtful, deliberate responses to the challenges life throws at us. We find that the more we practice emotional mastery, the more we create space for peace and clarity in our lives, and less room for the destructive force of anger. It's not about suppressing or denying our emotions. It's about choosing how we engage with them and how we allow them to shape our actions and interactions. Ultimately, the goal is not to be a slave to our emotions, but to master them in a way that serves us and enhances our well-being. By fostering emotional awareness and building resilience, we regain control over how we respond to anger and all emotions. And in doing so, we cultivate a life that is not only less reactive, but more fulfilling, peaceful, and aligned with our true values. The key to mastery lies within our ability to choose. Choose to rise above anger. Choose to cultivate peace. Choose to live with purpose.